How do you fetch and authorize data in Next.js? Simple, right? Just create an async function in your component, grab some data with Prisma, and return it. Oh, and if you need to make sure that the user is authenticated, just get the session and throw in a little if check. Done. Yeah, no, that might work in a small project, but once your application grows, things will fall apart fast. Reusability? Gone. Authorization? Buggy. And the simple function that you created, well, you now copy-pasted it 10 times. What you really need is a data access layer, a clean and scalable way to fetch and authorize data in Next.js. But what exactly is it? How does it work? And more importantly, how can you implement it yourself? Well, let's check it out. So to get started, I created this demo application, and as you see, it's a relatively simple application. Users can create blog articles, and then the blog articles are rendered down below. Let's create one quickly. So subscribe now. This will be the title. For the thumbnail URL, I will pass an image URL, and then for the content, I will pass some gibberish. If I click on create, we get a pending state, and then on the bottom, you see this new blog article. This means I revalidate my cache, I purge it pretty much, and then my data gets refetched and then displayed down below. Let's quickly analyze the code base to understand everything a bit better. So this is my index page, and inside of here I have an export default function, the index page. Then in the return statement I return a block creation form. This is a separate component. This video isn't about mutations, nevertheless let's quickly look at this component. So this is my block creation form. In here I set up client-side form validation using React hook form. You see all of my inputs inside of here, and yeah, that's it. Nothing groundbreaking. I then call a server action in my actions file. I can also open it quickly. So inside of here, I create a new mutation using Prisma, and then at the end, I revalidate my path. I revalidate my cache, and I purge it. This means I refetch my data. Then we can go back to the index page, because this is where the music plays, where the interesting stuff is. Underneath the block creation form, I suspend a render blocks component. What is that? Well, underneath the export default function, I have an async function. This async function is asynchronous, and I await data, get blocks. This get blocks function is defined at the top. Async function get blocks. I get block articles using Prisma, I order the result, and then I return it. So this gets my data, and then I await this promise in the render blocks function. Then I render the data, and then you get these little cards which don't look nice, but hey, it works. And then this function, this component render blocks is suspended. This means I suspend the data loading. So what I can do, for example, is go inside of here and just create a little delay. So I will create a 1 second delay, which means if I go back and do a hard refresh, I get loading ... and then I get my block articles. So here's my question to you. What's wrong here? I don't hear your answer. No, I'm joking. So we get our data, we await our data, we suspend our data. Everything looks correct. And this is correct. We fetch the data on the server side, caching works, everything works. But let's imagine the following. This page should be private. What I mean by that is only authorized users should be able to view this page. And let's forget the concept of a page. Instead, this data is private data. Only authorized users should see this data. So you might say, hey Jan, come on, don't bore me. It's super easy. Let's go to the export default function home. Let's get the user session, so I can create a comment. Let's get user session. Then let's create an if statement. Let's check if the user has a valid session. If not, we will redirect the user. But if the user has a valid session, then we will render the block creation form, and then we will suspend our data. This means only authorized users will see this private data. Yeah, I don't know. But you know what? Let's follow this idea. Let's implement authentication, and then I will show you the problem. So to implement authentication, I will use Kind. Kind is the sponsor of this video, and it's my favorite auth solution. They offer everything from basic authentication to advanced authorization and security that integrates in minutes. And soon they will also offer billing, which will allow you to start monetizing your ideas in minutes. And I already have better access access or early access, and it's super powerful. Oh, and by the way, I will create a huge B2B SaaS video relatively soon, so subscribe. But now, without any further ado, head over to the YouTube description, click on the first link, and then let's sign in. Then once signed in, you want to create a new business with a business name, kind domain, number of employees, and region. As you see, the business has been created, so I can open it. And as a next step, we get a little onboarding guide. So I want to use kind with my existing code base. Then I want to use kind in my Next.js project. And I want to allow my users to sign in with email, Google, and then also GitHub. The last step is to now connect our Next.js codebase with kind. So we can click on connect, and here we will get a little quick start guide. So I will implement kind quickly. You will also do it, and once finished, I will come back. So I now implemented kind. I also updated the last environment variable. This means the post login redirect URL. So once the user successfully logs in, I will redirect the user to the index page. Then we want to update our navbar, because in the navbar I have these two buttons, login and register, but they don't work. So I can go back to the navbar component, and I want to first of all get the user session. Now, if you watched my last video, which I will now pop up quickly, then you will probably know that you want to get the user session on the client side. This means I can delete this fake boolean constant is authenticated, and I want to create a new constant. I can destructure it, and then this will be equal to use kind browser client. This is a hook which exposes functions which only run on the client side. And I want to get is authenticated, and is authenticated is a boolean. This means if we have a valid user session, it will be true. If there's no user session, it will be false. And then I have a ternary here, and it checks if the user has a valid session, then we will render a logout button. If there's no valid user session, then we will have a login and register button. But the biggest problem is these are dummy buttons. They don't work. So what we want to do is import the login link and register link components, which can be used to start the auth flow. So I will copy the import statement, then I want to paste it on the top, and then instead of using these buttons, I will use the register link and then also the login link. These two components are headless, so I want to also add a class name, which will be equal to button variants. Then for the register button, I will also add a variant, which will be outline. This means if I again go back, I now see two buttons right here, and if I click on register, I will get redirected to the kind hosted authentication page. As you see, I can either register with Google, GitHub, or with my email. I want to continue with Google. And as you see, I got redirected back to the index page, which means I'm officially authenticated. So we can go back to the page.tsx. And as mentioned, we want to now get the user session in this export default function home, the index page. So what we can do is create a constant. Then this will be equal to get kind server session. Get kind server session exposes functions which only run on the server side. Then where I destructured, I want to get the get user function, and get user is a promise. This means we have to await it. So constant user equals to await get user. As you see, I get an error, and that's because I have to mark the function as async. But this is completely safe to do because this is a server component. Then, since I now get the user session, I can also create an if statement. So if there's no user, then I will just redirect the user back to /API/auth/register. So if I go back and do a hard refresh, I still get my data. But that's because I'm authorized, in other words, authenticated. But if I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, I will get redirected to the hosted authentication page. But now you might say, hey Jan, so as we both see, it works. The user gets redirected if there's no valid user session. Correct. But this is still a mistake. Why is this a mistake? Well, what is the core fundamental idea of React? It's reusability. You want to reuse your code as much as possible, and you want to follow the dry principle. Don't repeat yourself. And let's imagine the following. Right here I have this render blocks function component, whatever. I get my data and then I render these blocks block articles. I map over them and then render them. And currently it's only needed in this one page, in the index page. But now I also have an admin page. And you know what? I want you also rendered inside of here. Of course, I could copy the async function, paste it inside of here, but then I wouldn't follow the core idea of dry, don't repeat yourself. And why should I do that? I mean, I can just create a component and reuse it. So how about we create a separate component as mentioned? So I can go into the components folder, create a new file, render block articles. I can go back to the page.tsx, copy this async function, paste it into the render block articles. Of course, I want to also export this function, and then we have to also get the async function get blocks. I will just copy it and also paste it right here on top. As you see, I get a few errors. These are import errors. And now I imported everything, and if I go back to the page.tsx, I can import render blocks from the components. I can delete all of these unused imports. And if I save this and again go back and do a hard refresh, everything still works. I get my data. If I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, I will get redirected. So I get my data, I implemented reusability, I authorize the user. What am I talking about? Well, since we now have this component, I can also render it in the admin page. So I will just create a new return statement, and then in the return statement, I will get this render blocks component. This is self-closing. If I go back, I can navigate myself to /admin, and I will see all of the block articles here. Great, success. But what is if I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab? What is this? This is my private data. I'm not authorized, I'm not authenticated, but I still see this data. This should never happen. What's the problem? Well, again, if we go back and analyze our code base, we have a page.tsx. I check if we have a user session in the page.tsx, but I don't do it in the component itself, in the render block articles component. This means I fetch my data here without checking that the user has a valid session. And if now a team member comes into my company and forgets about this data, so that this data has to be private and just renders it in a new page, well, then I think you understand what I'm trying to say. This is a huge problem because our authorization logic is now defined for the page itself. I only check the user session on the page level, but not on the data level. This means my data is fetched without really knowing if we have a valid user session, and that's a huge problem. So now you might say, hey Jan, I know you want to talk about the data access layer, but let's forget about the data access layer. If I remember correctly, there was something called middleware. So let's use middleware. Good idea, let's implement it. If I head over to the kind documentation, then they have a section on how to set up middleware with kind. I will just copy this code example. Then in my root directory, I want to create a middleware.tsx or ts file, and then I will paste the code inside of here. Then for the public paths array, this will be nothing, so just an empty array. So what exactly does this code do? Well, right here I define middleware with kind. So middleware will run on all routes, but it won't protect the routes which I pass right here into the public paths array. So if I would, for example, pass an empty slash, then the index page would be a public page. But my index page should be a private route, which means this will be an empty array. This means if I save this should in theory protect my admin route. Correct? Well, let's test it out. If I go to my logged in version, my authenticated version, everything works. Nice. But if I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, I will get redirected. So we just fixed our problem, right? Yeah, we fixed it. But what is if I again get my stupid developer friend who says that the admin route is a public path? So /admin, and if I save this and again go back and try to reach the admin route, it will work. So as you see, /admin, I get my data. So here's the fundamental problem. Currently, we authorize the user on a page level. This is the case for both our page.tsx. Here, I only validate the user or verify the user session on the page level. The same thing is true for middleware. I only validate the user session on the page level. This means it's very easy to forget to protect certain pages, which means our data gets exposed. What does this mean? Well, this means we don't really want to verify the session on the page page level, but instead in the data itself. So before even the data gets fetched, we want to get the user session right in this data function. Now you might say, hey Jan, before we again go to the data access layer, how about we just open our function or our separate component, which was this render block articles? How about we go inside of here and get the user session in the async function? Yes! That's a super good solution. That's what I'm trying to tell you the whole time. You want to verify the user session in the async function where you get your data. But you don't want to do it in the component itself. You want to create a separate data access layer. What is a data access layer? Well, let's check it out. So if you go to the Next.js documentation, then you will find this section, creating a data access layer. So the Next.js team recommends you to create a data access layer to centralize your data requests and authorization logic. The data access layer should include a function that verifies the user session as they interact with your application. At the very least, the function should check if the session is valid and then redirect or return the user information needed to make further requests. And now you might ask me, hey Jan, what do they exactly mean with centralize your data requests? Explain it to me in plain English. So here's the thing, the Next.js team wants you to take all of your data access logic, this means these async functions, and it wants you to centralize them in a separate file, in a separate folder file. This does not really matter, but in a separate location. You want to centralize it inside of there and then verify the user session. So as an example, right here we want to get block articles. To move this function into a separate data access layer, we want to go into the app folder, create a new data folder, and since this specifically deals with block articles, I want to create a child folder called block. Now here I want to get all block articles. This means I can create a new file called get-all-block-articles.ts. Then I can copy this async function and move it into this file. I have to of course also export this function, and then in the render block articles function I can just import get blocks from my separate data access layer. But now nothing has really changed. This is still the same code. So what they want us to do is now verify the user session right inside of here. You could of course do it manually. This means you could now create the whole code, get kind server session, get user, blah blah blah. But instead it's a better solution to create again a separate file. This means we want to open the Explorer. I want to go into the data folder and I want to create a new child folder, the user folder. And this will be verify-user.ts. This means I can create an export async function. This will be verify user. Inside of here, I can again use the get kind server session hook. I will get the get user function. I will then await the user. And if we don't get a valid user session, then I will redirect the user to register again. If we get a valid user session, then I want to just return the user again. And then I can use this function and call it right in this get blocks function. So above constant blocks, I will call constant user equals to await verify user. And this means if I go back and again try to reach the admin route, everything works. But if I copy the URL and open it in a new incognito tab, I will get redirected to register. And this is without middleware, without page level authorization. This is just our data access layer. But now let's also maybe talk about the benefits of this data access layer. So first of all, by consolidating all of your data related logic, code, you also create a single source of truth. Because of course we could just copy paste this async function every time we want to use it, but then we will create multiple sources of truth. You don't want that. And also a data access layer makes it easier to update and debug your code. And also a data access layer makes a lot of sense, or it's great because it creates a natural checkpoint to enforce authentication, or in other words authorization. Because in every file I can now call this verify user function. And I recently got a comment, hey Jan, I mean, yeah, sure, this is all valid, but if the user, if your team member just forgets this function, then what's the use? So this is a little diagram. This is a data request without using the data access layer. A user makes a request. The request, first of all, gets intercepted by middleware. Middleware will check if the user has a valid session. But again, middleware will only run on the routes which you specify. This means if you forget to specify the admin route, then it won't run for the specific admin route. So middleware is your first layer of defense. If the user does not have a valid user session, you redirect the user. So the middleware makes a response. In this case, the response will be redirect the user. If everything is fine, then we will just forward the request to the server, and then the server will forward the request to the database. The database will get all of the data and return the response. This is all great, but again, if we forget to specify the middleware file, then this just breaks. Then we don't validate the user session. That's why we want to have multi-layered authorization. Again, we have a request. A user makes a request to our server. Middleware intercepts the request. If there's no valid user session, then we will redirect the user to authenticate. If everything is fine, we will forward the request to the server, and the server will forward the request to the database. But before the request hits the database, our new layer, data access layer, will again intercept the request and check if the user has a valid session. If so, then we will forward the request. If not, our data access layer will again respond and redirect the user to authenticate. So this is this multi-layered authorization. The more checkpoints you have, the more security you also have. And the data access layer is very nice because your data or your authorization logic is tightly coupled to your data. Your middleware is coupled to your page. Your data access layer is coupled to your data. And I want to also mention one more key benefit of using the data access layer, and that's that you give attackers a smaller surface to attack your application. What do I mean by that? About 2 months ago, Next.js had a huge vulnerability. Attackers could bypass Next.js's middleware with a single HTTP header. So the attack was quite simple. The attack exploits the X middleware sub-request header, an internal implementation detail that was never meant to be exposed to users. By supplying a specific value to this header, easily inferred from the target application's structure, attackers can completely bypass Next.js's middleware execution. So if attackers just passed a small header to the request, they could completely bypass this middleware. And that's why it's super important to have multi-layered security. You don't want to rely on one single point of security. You want to have multiple security checkpoints. And now I want to also optimize my data access layer a bit. So this is my admin route. It works perfectly fine. I get my data and that's great. But let's imagine the following. This admin page now needs some interactivity. I want to use the useState hook. I look at the page. I don't fetch any data. I only render one component. So why not? Let me mark this component with the useClient directive. And if I go back, I get this weird error. This method must be invoked in a Node.js environment. What's the problem? So the problem is quite simple. Currently, if I open my getBlocks function or if I open my renderBlockArticles component, this is a server component. I fetch data inside of here. I call the getBlocks function. The getBlocks function uses the getKindServerSession hook. The getKindServerSession hook only runs on the server side. So this verify user function, it only runs on the server side. But this is a client component, and that's why it says this method must be invoked in a Node.js environment. But this error isn't great. So that's why we can use something which is called import server only. So JavaScript modules can be shared between both server and client component modules. This means it's possible to accidentally import server only code into the client, which you want to never do. For example, consider the following function. Here they have an async function, get data, they fetch data, and more importantly, they pass headers with an API key, and this should never be exposed to the client. So what we want to do is prevent this code from even running on the client side. It should only run on the server side, and it should only be called from the server side or on the server side. This means what we can do is go back into our data access layer, and then on top I can import server only. Server only is already installed as a default when creating a brand new Next.js project. And this means if I now again go back and do a hard refresh, I get a better error, and it says you are importing a component that needs server only, that only works in a server component, but one of its parents is marked with the useClient directive. So it's a client component. So I instantly see, okay, this file right here throws an error. Okay, this only needs the server side. This page.tsx is the client component. Let me delete the use client and everything will again work. So as you see, to prevent accidental usage on client components, you can use the server only package. And again, it's installed as a default. Everybody has it installed. And also some people get confused. I mean, I have this actions file. This is marked with the use server directive. What's the difference? Well, the use server directive creates server actions. This means all functions which are exported from this file will be converted into server actions. This import server only says that this function should be called from or on the server side, and also it should only run on the server side. That's it. It does not convert anything. It's pretty much just a function which runs at first, it checks everything, and then only this function runs and gets my data. We can also import server only in our require or verify user function, so I can paste it right here on top. And now we protected our data access layer. And you want to use this import server only always in your data access layer. Paste it in every file which only works on the server side. But now I want to also make a performance optimization. So let's imagine the following. You have a dashboard, and in this dashboard, you want to get a lot of data. Get user, get subscribers, get revenue, get this, get that. Let's just say you have to call 10 functions to get your data. In every function, you will call the verify user function because you have to verify that you or that the user has a session. But this is kind of a performance problem because you will call 10 times this one function to get the same result. I mean, I will know after the first time already if the user has a valid session or not. I don't have to call the verify user function 10 times. So is it possible to maybe run this verify user function once and then cache the result? Well, yes, if you go back to the data access layer example, they mentioned that it makes a lot of sense to use the React cache API to memorize the return value of the function during a React render pass. So what is meant by that? Well, if I go to the verify user function, I can create an import and I can import cache from React. And this cache function is very interesting because again, we will call functions 10 times in our dashboard. This means we will call the verify user function 10 times, but one time is already enough for me. This means in this one render pass, in this one big render, I will call the verify user function once and then I will cache the result for the 9 outstanding requests. But if I navigate my page, so if I go from /dashboard to my index page, I will again call this function normally without any cache. So it only works in one render pass, but each subsequent request will again hit this verify user function without any cache and without any memorization. And I know this kind of sounds a bit confusing, caching a verify user function, which at the end of the day authorizes something, does not sound safe, but it's completely safe and it's recommended. You just cache a render pass, not each navigation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me and my heart, so please do it. And now enjoy your day and I hope I can see you in the next video. So bye!